Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make music like Lone. So, as usual, you get the project file and samples from this video in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because they will be available. And yeah, let's dive in. So, the first sound that I have here is this little pad, which sounds like this. And so the way that I made this sound was essentially I just took 3 layers and I put them in a group and did some processing on the group. So the first layer is this one. It sounds like this. It's this sort of like sparkly bell pad kind of sound. And yeah, this is just a one shot. This kind of layer is very important though, and I have another one shot in here as well, which I'm going to show you. But essentially, the makeup of this is this one analog layer, and then these 2 one shots. And what the one shot layers do is they add texture. So, like the analog layer gives us really the beef of this sound, but then these extra ones just kind of add like texture and sound and character on top of that. The thing about Lone's sounds is that they're always very like in your face and very like hyper, if that makes any sense. Like sort of, it's like this very intense sort of take on house. And so a good way to play that up is to use like a strong, powerful analog pad like this one, but then layer it up with these other ones that give it more character. So that's kind of the point of that. So there's the first one. And then the second one sounds like this. So yeah, again, just like another layer that gives it some character and gives it some kind of like old school vibe. So then for that analog layer, all it is it's just this simple pad. And Ableton's analog, like I said, it's 2 saw waves, and I have those going into a low pass filter. No modulation on the filter. And then that is going into the amp envelope, which is set like that. And then finally, I just have a bit of vibrato for some like kind of pitch warbliness. You can hear it kind of like going in and out of tune. And then I also have the unison on there because this wouldn't really be like a big kind of like old school house pad sound without it. Here's without it. And then with. So yeah, it just helps bring it to life. And then I also have an EQ8 on that because sometimes with these big unison pads, it can have like a lot of low end that can get kind of messy. So I just cut all that out. So then on the group here, what we have is, first off, I have this erosion. So you can kind of hear that. It's pretty subtle. If I turn it off and then back on, yeah, you can hear it's just adding a little tiny bit of like that lo-fi kind of grit on top of everything. And then after that, I have the saturator, which is set like this. So I have the drive up a little bit, and then I use the wave shaper to just really shape the sound. So here's without that, and then with it. So you can hear, not only is it adding like this nice grit to everything that we want, but I feel like it's kind of gluing these layers together really well. Like a lot of times people use compression to do this, but actually saturation, and you'll see this more as the track goes, as I show you more of the track. But saturation can actually do this pretty well as well because you're putting the same hard distortion effect on everything, so it's gonna make everything kind of sound like it's in the same world. So then after that, I have a bit of chorus for some stereo width, as well as this echo, which is also just for some stereo width. You can see I have the 2 ears. They're at very short delay times, but they're at different delay times. So that's what's giving it like a nice stereo image. Here it is with it, and then without. So yeah, you can hear that just gives it a bit more width and more like kind of lo-fi-ness, I guess. So then after that, I have this auto filter, which is automated. You can see just in the intro to come up. And then I have an EQ8, which is just boosting a little bit of high end. Here's without it, and then with. So again, it just brings out that really like hyper, sort of like extreme, bright, gritty house pad kind of sound that I wanted. And then finally, I just have a compressor side chaining into the kicks. So before I go with this layer, I will also show you the MIDI really quick and talk about that. So you can see these are actually some pretty like detailed chords. They're not actually that complicated though. Essentially what I have here is I just made basic major and minor ninth chords. Like that is an F sharp minor ninth. And then I just added the extra voice on top. And then here, another minor ninth with the extra voice. And then we have a major ninth with the extra voice on top. So, yeah, and you can see it kind of follows a pattern, too. Like, if you notice, there's 2 between these two, and then 3 between these two, and then 2 between these two. So that's just kind of like what I like to follow when I'm adding voices like this. So yeah, so this is something I do want to talk about, though. These kind of chords are pretty important for Lone's style. Like, he uses a lot of these big, jazzy kind of chords, especially with his pads. And so I wanted to kind of show you how to make those. So yeah, I'd recommend looking into major and minor 7th and 9th chords, and then playing around with the voices on those. So the next layer that we have here is this little rim shot, which sounds like this. So this is just in the intro. It really helps to keep the groove going. Lone does this a lot also in his tracks, but if we turn it off, you can hear, like, it's still a cool groove, but this really, I feel like, grabs your attention and, like, really puts you in it. So, yeah, it's just in the intro. So what this is it's just a basic rim shot, and I have it going through a bit of saturation, just to beef it up a bit. And then I have a bit of auto pan on there as well. Oh, whoops. But you can see there's a bit of auto pan on there, so that's just making it move from left to right. I heard this in a lot of Lone's tracks when he does a little percussion like this. He sometimes adds a bit of, like, auto panning kind of effects. And this is actually a good effect. Like, this does kind of make it more interesting. Because we don't have a lot of stuff that's, like, really in the stereo field like that. So, yeah, I think that that's a cool effect. So the next thing we have here is this cassette noise. Pretty straightforward. It just sounds like this. And so all this is just the simple little noise sample. You can kind of hear it there. And what I did was I brought it in here. I put it through this EQ8, which is just doing like a bandpass type of shape. And then it's being sidechained to the kick, so like when all the drums come in. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I heard Lone tends to do that in his tracks. Like when he has a noise like this, it'll be in the background, but then it'll be sidechained, so everything kind of stays under that kick. So that was the purpose of that. And yeah, the next thing we have here is this little vocal stab, which sounds like this. This is a pretty simple little thing. It's just this little vocal sample that I put into a sampler, and then I have this little pattern playing. This only plays in the intro. It's kind of like a foil to this rim shot. Like they have similar patterns. They're doing similar things for the rhythm. They're both playing off of the clap. It's just more like interesting rhythmic stuff. Sorry about that, the camera cut. But like I was saying, on that sound, we have not too many effects. Basically, the first one I have is this auto pan. So similar to the rim shot, like I said, they're supposed to be kind of like similar sounds. So I also have this one auto panning around. And then after that, I have a bit of reverb. You can hear that. It just gives it some atmosphere. And then I have it sidechained to the kick. I'm not exactly sure. I think... yeah, so that was just for that reverb tail that was ringing out there. So yeah, so pretty simple there. Again, just like these little vocal stabs are pretty important for this sound. It gives it like a cool kind of thing when you know how to play around with these. So that was an example of that. So the next layer we have here is the bass line, which sounds like this. So this is just playing the root notes from the chords, and what we have is a sound that I made with Operator. Basically, it's 2 sine waves. So the first one is like this, and then the second one is, yeah, I just have that turned up a tiny bit. You can see, and the chorus pitch is still at 1, or the chorus tune, excuse me. And yeah, it's just like very small amounts of FM to give it a little bit more harmonic content, because obviously a sine wave on its own, especially without the saturation, you can feel that, but you can't really hear it that well. So I was trying to add like something kind of gritty that you could really hear more in this bass sound. So that's the purpose of the second oscillator. You can hear when I turn that on. It's very subtle, but it just adds a little bit more harmonic content to the sound. And then when we turn the saturator on, you can hear that really like adds just the perfect amount where it's not like super distorted or super hard hitting in a way that like really makes it stick out too much, but the saturation just gives it that nice bit of grit, so you do hear it and then still feel it with that low sine wave. So then after the saturation, I just have a bit of compression, or a bit of sidechain compression, sidechaining to the kick. And yeah, so the next thing that I will show you is this little hi-hat thing, which sounds like this. So this is really simple. It's just two hi-hats. I have a closed hi-hat and an open one in a drum rack. And then what I have on that is just this auto filter, which is just cutting off the very high highs. So this is a trick I use a lot for lo-fi house. If you see my other videos on lo-fi house, you know that I do this a lot. Essentially, you just cut out the very high highs of a sound. Like, literally we go from this to this. And that sort of mimics like what a tape machine would do, or like what it would sound like if you were listening to it on cassette or something like that, where these kind of like lo-fi forms of listening to things tend to cut off those very high highs, and that's what gives us that like lo-fi sound, amongst other things. But this is a great way to sort of achieve that. So yeah, I just kind of did that there because they stuck out a little bit too much with the high end. Like it just didn't really, it kind of like gave up the illusion. So I just added that. And there you go. It gives it the lo-fi sound. And then for the pattern on this, I'll show you that as well. It's just this kind of like sparse hi-hat pattern. The goal for this is you want to kind of do like a more like old school house kind of sound. Like you want it to feel kind of like they're sampled from like an old house tape or something like that. So yeah, so then the next layer here is this ride, which sounds like this. So all this is it's just a simple old school drum machine ride sample, and I have it go in a simpler here, and then that's going through this EQ8, which is cutting out the low end, because you can hear with the sample that there is a bit of low end, and then there's also those like high highs that I cut off, similar to with the hi-hats, just gives it like the lo-fi kind of sound, and then I have this compressor sidechaining into the kick, pretty straightforward there. You can hear that one. And then for the pattern on this one, I'm doing this like pretty popular kind of like techno house pattern where you do like eighth notes, and then you can see the first one, the velocity is a little bit quieter than the second one. So yeah, that just kind of gives it like, what this does is essentially it allows it to still accent those upbeats and have that be like the loudest note, but it makes the ride, it's kind of just like a long like loop of ride sound, essentially, if that makes any sense. So then I just have that sidechain to the kick. And yeah, so then the next thing that we have here is the clap, which sounds like this. So this is something pretty important. One thing about Nolan's music is he has these very specific kind of claps. They're like these really hard-hitting, distorted, raw-sounding like drum machine claps. So I was trying to recreate that. So the way that I did this here was I started with this sample. So already like a pretty powerful, hard-hitting clap. I put it in a simpler, I believe I pitched it up +1. And then what I did on that was I added a bit of saturation. So you can see I have actually quite a bit of it. The drive is pretty high, and then I have the wave shaper on here, and I'm just using that to really like saturate it and bring it over the edge. So what you want is this kind of like overheated clap sound. It's like the way I like to think of it. Like it's kind of like a clap that just sounds like it's being put through a little too much distortion, but in a really nice kind of like analog way. So yeah, I just have the wave shaper to do that. Like I said, I turned up the bass frequency. I just kind of played around with these controls to get it nice and saturated and just warm. So then after that, I have a bit of reverb. This is something I heard in Lone's music as well. Like he tends to use a bit of reverb on his claps. So basically the way that I set this up was I have a pretty low dry wet, pretty short decay time, and then I played around with the input processing, the EQ. So what I did was I cut out some of the low end, and then I tried to let the high end through. You could honestly just turn this off probably. But yeah, so essentially here, we're trying to get more of like a high-end, ringy kind of reverb that's more similar almost to like white noise. If you listen to Lowe's music, you'll know like he does this a lot. He has like these kind of high-pitched, like high-end kind of reverbs on his claps. So I was just trying to recreate that using that input processing there. So yeah, so then the last layer that I have here is this kick, which sounds like this. So this is pretty straightforward. It's just like a powerful kind of like housey kick. Here's the original sample. So yeah, so I put that into a simpler, and I pitched it down -2, and then I just put it through the saturator, which is kind of doing a lot of this. Obviously, you can hear this kick isn't the most powerful, but what's there is like the sound. So you can hear this isn't too much in the low end. It has a really tight focus low end while still having that power in like the low mids that gives it the bumps. So that's what I wanted. I wanted a kick like that, and then I just kind of use the saturation to shape it to what I wanted. So I have a bunch of drive here, and I use the bass frequency as well as the depth here to really shape the wave shaper sound here. And then I use these controls. So yeah, just kind of get it in there. And the thing about this clap too is it's very much like, or this kick, is that it's very much just based on this, like this sound. Like you would never probably want to use this kick in a lot of other stuff. This isn't really a kick that I would use, but it works really well here with the bass and just like with the dynamics of everything. So that's something important that I think Lone does really well, is he uses these kind of drums that, and especially kicks that may not always work in other tracks, but they work really well in his tracks, and it's just a matter of being able to identify that. So yeah, so then on the master, I have one more thing, which is the saturator, which you can see isn't too hard. Like I have the drive up pretty low, and I'm playing around with these settings, but you can see it's not too crazy. Like the depth on the wave shaper is pretty low. The bass frequency is still pretty close to just 0, and the depth is pretty close to 0. So then it's just adding that last little bit of grit on the sound. So here it is without it. So it's already there for the most part, and then here it is with. So yeah, it's just adding that little extra bit of grit to the sound, and this really helps to tie everything together. It's like I was saying before, saturation on a group of things will give them all that same level of saturation and that same grit, and what it'll do is just make everything sort of like glued together and fit into the same mold. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Like I said, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, make sure to check there because they will be available. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, as well as subscribe and like this video if you like the video. My social media is on the screen. Make sure to check that out. And yeah, thank you again, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I will see you again tomorrow with another tutorial.